Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, April 28th, 2021. Shoo. All right. Not entirely smooth with the start of the show or with the recitation of the date. It's still not really happening for me. I guess I'm just not believing that it's 2021, or it may have something to do with yet another sort of close shave with getting the show started on time. I don't know. Do you think it's probably not good for show prep to be racing to the keyboard and microphone with seconds to spare just so you can hit the button on starting the music? Hey, you probably should sit down and get things together ahead of time. But we don't do that. And where would the excitement be? And where would the excitement come from in the show if we prepared ahead of time? All right. Well, let's see. We do have Bill up in Portland, Maine, doing that prep for us, so we can always lean on him. Here's what he's got to say about what I'm going to do, and it's as good a guide as any. Let's see. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. That part is okay. Check. Where's my pencil? I'll just check that part off. It's live now. Kagro X, me. All right. Check again. Says it's now safe to listen without a mask. That's true. In your rumpus room, if you're alone, I guess, with a small gathering of friends who have been vaccinated and or other woodland critters. This is a special exemption, of course, for the squirrel listeners, squirrel population of Portland, Maine. So, we're doing, it's a little bit of favoritism, true. But if you tweet something like this for us each morning to get us started and provide a crutch for us like that to get the show underway, the exemption can apply to you as well. Any woodland creatures, or indeed, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you do enough, I suppose we could clear the way for creatures of the savannah, undersea creatures as well, if you've got the infrastructure to provide for it. We have no objection to adding them to the program. All right. Where are we today? Well, same place as always, physically. But we are minus Greg Dworkin today, who had some issues to take care of, including some burgeoning computer issues. So hopefully we can get those things cured and fixed up and ready to roll again. But, these days, you never know how long it's going to take to get the things you need. We may have to start from the ground up. I don't know. But if it's not one thing, it's another, right? If it's not the generator, it's the computer. So I wish him good luck with that problem, of course. I asked him to see if he could maybe record Abby barking on his phone and send that to us so we can just play it as a sound effect so that we feel like we are all together. In these days of pandemic, we have to make do with the technology that allows us to still, all right, whatever. Anyway, the pandemic apparently being declared over in most of the places that never believed in it, and partially on the mend everywhere else. But I have seen some interesting discussion today, probably true in many places, that, for instance, the announcement of the CDC's new guidelines for masking in general, and in particular out of doors if vaccinated. The new announcement is if you're unvaccinated, then for the most part, you can safely go about unmasked outdoors. And many people pointing out that for the vast majority of the country's, let's say, open spaces, the vast swaths of the country colored red because many of their neighbors most of their neighbors, I guess, voted for Republicans and for Trump, even though most of their neighbors are either wheat fields or open grassland or federal reserves or what have you. Those areas, where people are few and far between, that's been the case all along. Not that it's necessarily been safe for them to do it, but that they were doing it anyway. And in vast parts of the country, people have been going about unmasked indoors as well, in the stores. And it's an illustrative, again, of how the differences between the way the crowded coastal regions conduct themselves versus the vast and open spaces of the interior. But yeah, it's a little bit puzzling watching people. It's equally puzzling trying to figure out why people are so angry about the onerous restrictions that have been placed on them if they've never been observing them at all in the first place. But, again, I'm on this search for logic, and I'll be going around in circles forever if I continue in that quest. All right, lots of other things to bring to your attention, many of which are stored in Pocket, others of which are documented along the way in my Twitter feed. I was reminded this morning, just an offhand comment from Oliver Willis. What was he talking about? I guess he was basically making light of the claims, the screams, the shouts from Republicans continually condemning everything that there is under the sun that has to do with Democrats as socialism, or socialisms, as we like to say. And it reminded me just how often conversation here at Kagro in the Morning World headquarters, sometimes on the air, sometimes not, turns to that topic. Yeah, here's what he's got. He was retweeting Bobby Lewis from Media Matters, who was, again, documenting for us the atrocities taking place on Fox News this morning. Bobby Lewis noting that the three talking heads on display here, and I think, are they still all working remotely from one another? I don't know. It looks like that way from the way the cameras are set up, but it looks like they have much more professional sets behind them now. They may be just distanced in the studio. Anyway, denouncing higher taxes on the wealthy, always a problem on Fox. Fox and Friends complains, if you used to have a job pre-COVID and now you're getting a paycheck from the government and it's more than what you made, they like that, even though it's our money. That is called socialism. And of course, I don't really even know exactly what they're explaining. There's very few people, I think, who used to have jobs pre-COVID and are now getting paid by the government more than what they made when they were working, because I recall them passing all the bills and fighting over the funding levels of those bills, and I thought they were pretty clear about taking care of that problem, which wasn't a problem, that people not be incentivized not to work by being paid more from federal relief checks than they would have been paid by continuing in their jobs, and that's been true of no one. So, never mind that, obviously. But Oliver Willis making fun of that and saying, yeah, this has been the plan all along, evil socialisms. The socialism attacks, he notes, do not work. They simply don't. They get Republicans excited and in a frenzy, but they do not move the needle one iota. These guys cried wolf one time too many. If you insist that Bill Clinton, Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden are all socialism, people will just tune out. Yes. Well, it's funny because he's also one of the biggest advocates of saying, well, you don't ignore Fox News in the hopes that they'll go away. That's not the way you deal with a threat like this. But at the same time, he seems to be implying that, if you ignore the cries of socialism, they'll go away. Although I think he'll tell you, no, I'm not saying they'll go away. I mean, he's saying, people will just tune out. And then the next tweet is a picture of Barack Obama yawning somewhere. Look, I don't know where he is. And saying, it's socialism. Yeah, it's always socialism. Yawn. It makes it look like the idea is to yawn and ignore it, but it's not. It's just, I don't know. It's an interesting, weakness in the presentation, I suppose, but it's not a full battle attack plan. I'm not saying that's what he's doing here. But, it's true. I think he's got a point here in saying that if you're always just saying everything that Democrats do and every Democrat that gets offered up is socialist or socialism, the embodiment of socialism, eventually, I suppose, the effectiveness of the attack could be said to wear off. And I think what he's getting at is kind of what I was getting at, which is, to me, I think the response is to be mocking how often they do this. And that I was just commenting, having seen it this morning, and I said, every conversation, every small talk conversation, when nothing's going on, when the conversation is, how's it going today? How was your day today? What's up? In my house, it all starts with, I will walk into a room where my wife is sitting peacefully watching television and take a seat and go, well, Hitler, socialism. That's literally the way all my small talk conversations begin at home. And I sort of regret, I've thought about this many times over the years. I've started doing it on Twitter, when I would just log on to Twitter and nothing in particular is going on, and I would say, I might as well just say Hitler, socialism. But I never really brought myself to do it. I've done it a couple of times, and, mostly people just didn't get what I was doing. And I would get responses like, Hitler wasn't socialist. That's wrong. Only Jonah Goldberg thinks that, and that's not true. And like, they'd try to like educate me on the differences between Nazism and socialism, like on Twitter. Okay. That wasn't really what I was looking for. I was making fun of the juxtaposition of the two, given the fact that U.S. conservatives very frequently insist that they are either the same thing or that they're equally applicable to any Democrat in any position of power or even just running for a position of power. And that's what I'm poking fun at. And so anyway, I said that, I literally just walk into a room and will say Hitler, socialism. And a few people retweeted that thinking, oh, what a funny joke it is. But I wish there was a forum. I sort of wish there was a forum. My wife's not on Twitter, and it's probably just as well that she's not. It'd be too boring to her for the most part. But if you ever got a chance to meet us somewhere, we're just walking on the street and you would say, I follow him on Twitter or I listen to the radio show, and I'm curious, does he really just walk into an empty room or a room where you're sitting, sometimes an empty room, and just say Hitler, socialism? I was just curious about that because I would love to see your reaction. Like, are you kidding? Yes, he absolutely does do that. Why does he do that? That I am not so sure. But it's true. I really do walk in and begin all small talk conversations, at home anyway, by declaring Hitler, socialism, just how was your day? That's usually my response. No longer, of course, for the past year have we bothered asking how was your day, because our days have taken place in front of one another for a year. So we don't have any even rhetorical questions about how our day was. I'm here, she's there. Today she's at the dentist, so no chance of having my claim disputed, at least at the moment, by any of the producers in the building. But we'll see about what happens when she comes home. By the way, I'll put out this alert, and then I can say I took care of it when she remembers that she wanted to do this. She planned yesterday to interrupt the broadcast to rail against the Terry McAuliffe campaign for governor in Virginia. As, of course, you may remember, Terry McAuliffe has already been governor of Virginia, and you may recall that in Virginia, once you've been governor, I don't know, we turn you into Soylent Green. I don't really know why this is our plan, but we have a one term and out thing. That's our term limit for the governorship here. One term and out. But the loophole is, well, if you're one term and then out and then run again later as a non-incumbent, you can do that. So I guess it was good in terms of weakening the power of the incumbency to just sort of automatically hand yourself a second term. That's not a completely ridiculous notion. But anyway, we now have Terry McAuliffe running again under the loophole, and I suppose that makes him the front runner. He's certainly got the most name recognition of anybody running for governor, other than, well, more name recognition than anybody than the current governor, who can't run. So I guess he's in an advantage here. And he did an admirable enough job, I suppose, as governor the first time around. And so, people looking for a steady hand or whatever might be attracted to his candidacy. I am, I'm not in particular, but I'm not turned off by it, except insofar as my wife has this frustration with Terry McAuliffe. Perfectly good governor. And she, a perfectly good Democrat, would admittedly absolutely be voting for him were he to win the nomination. Although she's now currently on the bubble, and she's now like, I might not vote. Of course, she'll be depending on the rest of us to get the job done, and that's not entirely fair. But she's incensed because her cell phone number has somehow ended up on Terry McAuliffe's lists for text contact during the campaign. So, the suspicion is that she gave, made quite a few small-ish contributions during the 2020 campaign cycle through Act Blue. So her suspicion is that, her data got bought and sold somewhere along the line, either directly between Act Blue and Terry McAuliffe, which apparently Act Blue denies is the case, because she called him to find out. Anyway, the point is, the campaign's been texting her, random stuff, nothing horrible, meet me, downtown in a motel or anything like that. Just normal stuff. Hey, but normal annoying stuff. Hey, Terry just got, endorsed by, the latest one was endorsed by the Washington Post. Okay, it's the sort of thing you might be excited about if you were Terry McAuliffe or another McAuliffe or working on the campaign or whatever, or stood to, gain a job in the administration or something like that. Or, but otherwise, normally people, whatever, who cares? And the other ones, hey, Terry's winning a poll here or there, or hey, a deadline is coming up for donations. Anyway, the personal cell phone, she likes to keep things clear so that if she's being interrupted by texts, it's something she needs to know. She hates spam texts. Everybody does. But anyway, apparently they have been texting, and she's been asking them to stop and stop and stop. She's made 5 requests, including calling the numbers that have been texting her so that she can get somebody on the phone and say, somebody got to do something about getting me off the list here. I'm about at my wit's end here. Except, the texting program, I guess, is, I don't know how they farm it out exactly, but it's a different number every time. So she complains and then blocks the number it comes from. But I guess they, farm out the job of texting everybody to different numbers who may or may not be, numbers held by actual private individuals. Just numbers they generate and use for texting and then discard. I don't know. But there's no way to get the message to, Central McAuliffe headquarters, apparently, and tell them you're driving her over a cliff. She's going to end up not voting if you win the nomination. And I don't know if I can actually change her mind about that. So if anybody knows anybody who's in charge of the texting program on the Terry McAuliffe for Governor campaign, please call them and tell them to contact me so that I can get that number off of their list and they can leave her alone. She will consider that to have been a great success. I don't know if it's going to change her mind about voting, but it's a long way from here to November, so possibly. Just kind of want to point that out. Terry McAuliffe has always been kind of aggressive in outreach, and that's kind of what made him governor the first time around. So it's hard to fault him for it, but the fact that there's no opt-out is going to annoy a lot of people. It'll probably work more than it hurts, which is why you won't change it, but quite annoying. Maybe you've had a similar problem. Anyway, I didn't mean to spend all that time on it, but now we don't have to spend that time on it later, so that's pretty good. All right, today, Wednesday, April 28th, is the day for President Uncle Joe to address a joint session of Congress. You all know why we say it that way and not calling it a State of the Union, and I don't need to go over that. And it's just a testament to your ability to absorb these things and your appreciation for detail and process. That's good. So he addresses the nation tonight, apparently with a limited audience. I understand that the expectation is that they will be restricting the size of the crowd in attendance today in the House chamber to about 200 members. And I think that they're going to at least attempt to try to make a requirement that they all be vaccinated members. I don't know exactly how that will work out, because it will become politically ticklish to simply exclude all Republicans. And I'm not certain how many Republicans will, one, want to attend in person, two, have been vaccinated, and three, be willing to produce some sort of proof or release their medical records or make a claim that they've been vaccinated to anyone, because that would be too much like vaccine passports to them, and that's one of the things they're supposed to be freaking out about. Unisex, Mr/Ms/ non-gender specific potato head, Dr. Seuss, 4 pounds of steak, Jade Helm, tunnels under Walmart, Hitler, socialism, Kenya, goes all the way back. This is what they're upset about now. So I don't know what kind of crowd they're going to be able to put inside the chamber today. So there's going to be, the door is open to terrible optics-based reportage on this address tomorrow. And I want you to be prepared for that. I don't want you to accept it when you see it. I want you to scream when you see it. But it's the situation, I think, will lead to, I think a lot of people will remark on the optics. And that I think is what will open the door to actually reporting on it and obsessing over it tomorrow, with fewer people in the chamber. For instance, our good friend from up in Canada, Brian Monroe, and I keep qualifying him that way. And really, we should just say he's a good friend, because if you think of your friend as a Canadian and not simply as your friend, then you are prejudiced. There you go. It's a big callback to those of us raised in the 70s and early 80s, watching those public service announcements. Do you all know what any of you know what I'm talking about with that thing? You don't? All right. Well, all right. No, none of you can speak back to me because, of course, it's a radio show. Anyway, what I was going to say was, Brian wondered whether anyone, actually he was looking to make a wager. He tweeted to me and to Bill and to Joan and to Greg, the whole fam here, and asked if anyone want to make a wager. Now, of course, betting as between the two currencies, the whole problem. We could bet in Ameros, the fictional NAFTA currency. Maybe that would work. Or Dogecoin, I guess, is a possibility as well. But he'd be willing to bet a few bucks, he says, Canadian, that the Republican House members jeer and boo and show all kinds of verbal disrespect to Biden during his address to Congress. Very good. And I don't know. I ordinarily, obviously, they would. And members who could doubt that Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Madison Cawthorn, Paul Gosar, Louis Gohmert, for that matter. Although I don't know how much calling out Louis Gohmert actually has done over the years. But who could doubt that they would want to do such a thing and to garner attention for themselves by doing so? But will they be in the chamber is one question. I don't know how much control the Biden White House is exercising over who is invited to attend in person. They may, according to the usual protocols, perhaps they throw things open to the Republican leaders of both chambers to choose some limited number, preferably from among those vaccinated. But that would likely end up eliminating a lot of the people who would be the most willing to scream and shout and protest inside the room. So, I don't know. And of course, Mitch McConnell, I don't know. He doesn't seem to go in for that all that much, quite honestly. As much of a jerk as he is, and as much trouble as I'm sure he'd like to cause for Democratic presidents, whoever they may be, I don't know if he goes in for the shouting out during the speech. But it may be self-limiting in that the unvaccinated may be unwilling to try to get into the chamber. And instead, these days with social media being what it is, produce their own response addresses instead of waiting for the official one. These last couple of years, we've noticed a proliferation of unofficial responses by people who would never be selected to give an official response. So there's probably a lot of that, and people will probably be prepping for that rather than sitting in the chamber. And as you know, I find those addresses fairly boring. I'm sure they do too. But also, just with fewer numbers inside the room, the ability for members who are not quite so attention hungry, but who are still find themselves in disagreement with any Democratic president, sometimes they're encouraged to call out, but to do so more anonymously as part of a crowd, and they feel safer surrounded by members who are ideologically similar. And with fewer of them in the chamber, those Republicans who do agree to attend the address might just not feel all that safe in calling out. By contrast, or in addition, I guess I could say, the Democrats who will be in attendance, I don't think anything will constrain them from conducting themselves the way they normally would at a Democratic president's address to a joint session or State of the Union address, as the case may be. But there will be far fewer of them there for the effect that you usually get when there are lines for which they'll stand and applaud, and sometimes even cheer aloud. And that noise is overwhelming as ambiance in the television broadcast of the address, and it's what makes the actual address stand out from and look like it has that much more authority, very often, optically speaking, than the responses do, since the responses are usually given without an audience in attendance, and certainly not one in an echo chamber, like literal echo chamber like that, like the House of Representatives chamber. So the speech will look and sound and feel a lot different, and the difference between the natural advantage that goes to the president on this thing might be absent. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So far, Brian Monroe sums this up by saying, it sounds like you're taking that bet. It sounds like, it probably does sound like that. I'm telling you not to make that bet. Not because I'm sure I'll win it, but because I don't know how we will handle the payoff as between Canadian and American dollars. I don't know. I don't bet on things mostly because I hate to lose stuff, period. And money probably chief among the things I hate to lose in general. You all have a pretty good idea of how much of it is coming in versus what you would need to be able to run around making bets with people. So, just go to patreon.com and figure it out. Am I in a position to be betting any of that? And the answer is no. But, on a non-monetary basis, I will say this. I think that the chances for calling out are somewhat reduced because Republicans will be there in small numbers and probably self-selecting against the sort of people who would be likely to call out. However, if one of them makes it in and makes an effort, the likelihood that they're calling out and booing and jeering will be audible is that much greater. It just won't be joined by tremendous numbers of Republicans. 200 people allowed in the chamber. That's going to have kind of an empty feel to it. But I do think it's going to be obvious to those watching at home. And if if they were being strategic about it, Republicans would probably say, here we have the first opportunity in forever to be able to respond to an address like this without the built-in disadvantage of having a small or non-existent audience. But there's still, 200 people versus if they give this. I think only rarely has anybody attempted to give a response speech in front of an audience that's capable of providing anything like the level of feedback that you get in the House chamber. But that place is wired for audio, and it's much different. So we'll see. There's also, another factor in all of this is there are now more Republican members of Congress favorably inclined to the idea of calling out and booing and jeering than ever before. So that poses a problem as well. I'll be interested to see. And mostly I just want to see for myself what's going to happen, by which I mean letting other people watch and figuring out what's happening and make video clips of it and circulate it on Twitter where I can see it as opposed to actually watching the thing. But we'll see. We'll see how things go today. I, of course, will be mostly distracted tonight with a Zoom meeting that will concern the reopening of facilities in our area. But we're supposed to wind it up before the speech begins because there's actually people on the call that want to watch the speech, which is amazing to me. But that's how my night will be consumed. Talking about protocols for reopening and then watching people watch the non-State of the Union address today, and I guess keeping an eye on the audience and what they're doing. All right, let's see. Oh, Mad Hatter chimes in here with a comment here. I'm looking for the picture of two women sitting behind President Biden on the rostrum. That photo should be in every newspaper tomorrow. I agree. That point brought up earlier today, I think Stephen Dennis, the Capitol Hill reporter, making that point. Very prescient. I think that'll be a big part of how things are discussed tomorrow as well. It's the first time that there will be two women sitting behind him as Speaker of the House and Vice President of the United States. That is to say, President of the Senate, because it's an address to the joint session. Right. Okay. That will make some difference. Good comment here, too, by the way. Just speaking of the reopening protocols and indoor air, outdoor air, the requirements for masking, etc. Justice was saying, as goes the outdoor masking, this is a good point. If I can smell someone smoking from around the block, damn well I'm wearing a mask when people are 20 feet from me outside. I get that point, and that has occurred to me a number of times. I realize how far away I can detect it when somebody is out there smoking, or even if they're not smoking and they're walking past me in cold weather and you see the steam from, venting from their mouths. It reminds you visibly, just how far this stuff can spread and how far away you can be and still detect significant concentrations of smoke. Well, you can't obviously, smell or taste the coronavirus in that vapor, but the odds are it's there, and smoking's a good reminder about that. And it's a good reminder. Every once in a while I'm behind somebody at a stoplight if the weather's warm and the windows are down, and I realize, I'm stuck smelling their cigarette. I'm frequently reminded of it when they finish their cigarette and then toss the butt out the window. They're like, this thing is too disgusting and smelly for me to keep in my car. And I'm a smoker. And in fact, not only am I a smoker, I'm the smoker who just smoked that cigarette, and it's still too gross, and I'm throwing it out the window. And then if you're still sitting at the red light, I got to roll up my window. Now your cigarette butt isn't even partially contained in your car. It's just sitting there burning and drifting into my car. And it's a bit annoying. And I just think, the same thing's happening with their coronavirus breath as well. And, it's probably not in concentrations that can infect me, but yeah, I think about those things too. Good point, Justice. All right. Moving right along to actual news and other observations. One more random one, I suppose, that's happening now on Twitter before I move on to the stories parked in Pocket. Paul Waldman, my favorite non-relation, who I guess, I don't know, but whose relation I have to continually deny I suppose, tweeting this morning in response to one of Greg's favorites. So in honor of Greg, a quote from G. Elliott Morris has a thread going where how far up does it start? Just one tweet up. All right, so I'll scroll up. He starts out this way. Yes, the Democratic Party label has become more nationalized and progressive in recent decades. That'll make Rachel Bidikofer happy, or at least happier. I think she needs to see more of this stuff happening. But the opposite has happened for the right, too. Does the GOP actually, in fact, get off easy? How miscalibrated are public perceptions of the parties? Now, he's responding to Nate Cohn, who's, are these Nate's charts here? Nate saying yesterday, the overarching theme is more interesting than the anti-woke part, the idea that Dems can't define themselves or their opposition, so mainstream Dems get defined by a powerless but vocal and tone-deaf activist class, while the GOP gets off easy. Now, what do we call him? G or Elliot? I don't know. Elliot continues on here to say, I'm genuinely asking here. This is the crux of what I was interested in. If someone has any research, please feel invited to self-promote here. I think the conventional wisdom on activists are hurting the Democratic brand is in need of some hard data, especially for the comparison against Republicans. Now, a few people responded that there was such data offered anyway, just during and after the 2020 elections. But I guess he's asking how well it stands up. He continues on and says, I wonder how much this is a product of a certain ideological class of journalists on Twitter seeing a bunch of, yes, often tone-deaf activist posts and articles and conflating it with the public's reaction to the parties. This is why we have polls, people. And I guess there's more on it. I guess this must be in response to Carville, James Carville's comments yesterday saying something, I don't know, I didn't pay that much attention, but he was jumping on the bandwagon of this whole, I guess for lack of, this is the term he uses for, woke and wokeness, which I think is nebulous and unworthy of the attention in terms of condemning it. But that, it's a problem. Real people don't talk this way, kind of thing, i.e., wink, wink, non-urban, wink, wink, heartland, Anyway, Brendan Nyhan, I guess, commenting on it and picked up also by Elliot Morris. Everybody's talking about everybody else here. Important something from, I guess, is Jamel Bowie's JB View. Is that, do I have, oh no, it's the other J Boo, Jonathan Bernstein. Okay, so he says, important Jonathan Bernstein on the lack of evidence that woke language itself by Democrats has hurt them politically, written up in Bloomberg. Maybe we should start there and read through it. Well, maybe we'll save it for another, although we have all day today with no Greg. The counterpoint, Brendan says, is that Democrats taking more racially liberal positions could certainly hurt them. And that interests Elliot Morris on this. Paul Waldman then chimes in saying, yeah, this right here to Elliot's request, if anybody has got research really showing that activists are hurting the Democratic brand, he says, yeah, this right here. And they talk about AOC a lot on Fox, so therefore the left is killing the Democratic Party is not evidence. That's a fair point, I think. And so open for conversation. That's pretty interesting as a subject. I should probably, in fact, go back to it and keep it open. And maybe I should go back to that thread and look for the Jonathan Bernstein article and see what he's got on that. This is as good a topic as any. Let's do it, stream of consciousness. Jonathan Bernstein writing, are Democrats too woke for voters? Possibly. But the reality is that slogans and rhetoric, I guess we're getting back to defund the police stuff. Slogans and rhetoric make very little difference in elections. Well, what the hell does make differences? Tuesday's big flap was an interview at Vox with James Carville, who accused Democrats of being too woke and using faculty lounge language instead of locker room language, I guess, instead of rhetoric voters like. Kevin Drum adds, one thing that's clear is that Republicans sure think that attacking wokeness is a winning strategy. I'm not so sure. Good. The truth is that all the rhetoric probably doesn't matter much. If the economy is doing well, and that's Carville to a T, right? It's the economy, stupid. Well, now he's old and cranky and it's wokeness. All right. The truth is that all the rhetoric probably doesn't matter much. If the economy is doing well, then the president's party benefits. That's pretty conventional wisdom, though. And you never know in this day and age. Voters tend to reward peace and prosperity. They punish economic downturns, casualties in foreign wars, and presidential scandals. And of course, what if a pandemic kills more Americans in 1 year than all the foreign wars, or the domestic wars for that matter, that the United States has ever fought, ever, since 1775, but everybody dies in 1 year. That gets punished, but only barely, apparently. Anyway, it's obviously not that simple, but the effects of the other stuff are very hard to see in election results. Sure, it's better to give good speeches than bad ones, but there's simply not much evidence that good slogans help or that inelegant or out-of-touch language hurts very much. Getting to my point here, that's good. Somebody ought to. While it's probably true that some liberal writers and activists use language that doesn't resonate with swing voters, the politicians who focus most on obscurities are Republicans who are deeply steeped in the various controversies that dominate conservative media. I think that's probably pretty true, and that probably reflects my tweet from yesterday where I was just basically, contrasting essentially what's going on in the two parties by what they spend their time on. I have to scroll back and find exactly how I said it because it was kind of wordy. It wasn't meant to be a bumper sticker or anything, but definitely, I think, made the point. Where was this thing? It's back a few. Got to keep scrolling. It's taking me a while here. Was it yesterday? It could have even been the day before, but I have a feeling like it was just after yesterday's show. Yeah, here we go. Was healthcare, infrastructure, fair taxation, COVID relief, voting rights. Who am I talking about, right? Versus the other party, the other major party in the United States. Dr. Seuss, Mr. Potato Head, Jade Helm, light bulb bans, 4 pounds of meat, Kamala Harris's book, plastic straws, Confederate statues, everything's a false flag, and the government is taking all the ammo. I mean, those are the platforms. So, I guess you could ask, well, why is it that it's so damn close? Why are we always in danger of having Republicans win the presidency? Why is it that even with gerrymandering, they're able to secure such unfair overrepresentation for themselves? If Americans, I don't know, maybe they're not. All the polling and certainly the conventional wisdom says that's what they care about. Healthcare, infrastructure, fair taxation. But apparently a lot of them are willing to sacrifice any real discussion of it anyhow in favor of Dr. Seuss, Mr. Potato Head, Jade Helm, and the like. So, that's unfortunate, to say the least. All right, where were we with the Bernstein article, right? Right. So, yeah, his point being, well, it's probably true that some liberal writers and activists use language that doesn't resonate with swing voters. The politicians who end up focusing on it, mostly on not on that, but on obscurities in general, are Republicans. And their echo chamber reinforces it. But that's where he says, I really disagree with Drum. Do Republicans think that attacking wokeness will help them win? I have no idea. What seems more plausible is that the stuff they're talking about is what sells in the conservative marketplace. It's what keeps ratings high at Fox News, elevates conservative talk show hosts, sells books, and wins donations. Republican politicians who want to get noticed in this world have learned exactly which parades to jump to the front of, and those aren't necessarily the parades that swing voters are cheering. Carville closes by urging Democrats to emulate Republicans. Oh boy. This is a bit weird given that Democrats, despite some disappointments, just delivered unified government and now have won the popular vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections. They haven't done that because they're actually better at electioneering. The point is that it just doesn't matter much. What does matter is the effect all this has on a party's capacity to govern. By empowering their media allies to the extent that they dominate the party, Republicans have seriously harmed their ability to run the government. Democrats certainly don't want to allow a small fringe to run their party, and we'll see how their policy agenda works out. But the last thing they should be doing is attempting to copy the way Republicans have organized themselves. And I think that's probably a pretty fair point on all of that. Okay. Quite interesting and a good point of view to add to the mix in all of this. But what did it remind me of as we were reading through all of this? Oh, yes. One of the things that struck me about how interested, how focused on these obscurities Republicans really are. I saw Dave Weigel tweeting yesterday basically a compilation of what has what Lauren Boebert, she's a good bellwether and all this, has been obsessed with in the last couple of days. He writes, to own the libs, you must first learn how to own yourself, and compiles this 4-piece visual vignette. Lauren Boebert tweeting on April 24th, Joe Biden's climate plan includes cutting 90% of red meat from our diets by 2030. They want to limit us to about 4 pounds a year. Why doesn't Joe stay out of my kitchen? Followed, of course, by Daniel Dales reporting that a Fox News host has now admitted that his show was wrong about Biden limiting red meat consumption. Followed by Lauren Boebert's April 26th angry tweet. Why is the Biden regime using taxpayer dollars to provide illegal immigrants entering the U.S. with a copy of Kamala's children's book? Which, of course, it's not. And is followed by a reporting headline reading, the New York Post deleted 2 stories falsely claiming the Biden administration was gifting Kamala Harris's book to migrant children. Yeah, the New York Post, which was driving all of that, just simply ducked the whole thing and deleted their stuff. And I think we may have noted that on yesterday's show, or perhaps right after. I retweeted Daniel Dales reporting that, yes, they just simply now redirect to the New York Post front page. No correction or retraction or anything like that. Nothing so elegant as that. They just disappeared the story. So we've got some background on that. That's one of the things parked in Pocket, and that'll help us segue over to Pocket, I think. I'm pretty sure I put these things aside. However, it looks like some of them have disappeared, but some of them were tweets, and that's why it's difficult somehow to dig them out. There we are. I knew I had at least one, but was it? No, different one. All right, well, I've got at least one story. Pocket's really fallen down on the job for me. I got to find a different reader, but I'm so used to using this one. But I have this report. Aside from tweets about the retractions, I don't know why I'm using this as a source, but it must have been attached to one of the tweets. And I don't do my own research. I crowdfund my research. Showbiz411.com. Not the place I usually end up. However, the story is, yes, right. There were some screen caps of this conversation between or Twitter or Facebook posts by the reporter responsible. And I meant to save this story for when my wife got back from the dentist, because she was asking yesterday, well, what is the New York Post saying about this? Like, it's completely wrong. Like, what happens? Where's the reporter who reported it? Well, apparently the reporter who reported it has now resigned. And the early word was she was saying that she had been forced to write this story even though she knew it was incorrect or just plain false. And now she's resigning. But by the way, on the way out the door, I really loved working at the New York Post, and I'm sorry to go because they're all such fine people, except they force her to do these things. So Showbiz 411 has it this way. Veteran New York Post reporter quits, says she was forced to write untrue story about Kamala Harris's children's book at border. veteran New York Post reporter Laura, I like to call her Mambo, Laura Mambo Italiano, and you know why, has quite the paper today. She says, well, they're missing a word here again. She says she, I'm sure, was ordered to write an untrue story about Kamala Harris, which is really still, despite the fact that it's a tabloid and no one really believes the New York Post about anything, still kind of spectacular news. An announcement, she says, I think via Twitter, but we'll see. Today I handed in my resignation to my editors at the New York Post. The Kamala Harris story, an incorrect story I was ordered to write in which I failed to push back hard enough against, was my breaking point. It's been a privilege to cover the city of New York for its liveliest, wittiest tabloid, a paper filled with reporters and editors I admire deeply and hold as friends. I'm sad to leave. The story, which of course you will remember, appeared on the cover. It was their cover story and then just poof, gone. Appeared on the cover. It was called Come On In, Kamala Harris, Come On In. Remember, we complained about that yesterday. It claimed that Vice President Harris, though she wasn't at the border, had ordered copies of her children's book. Not like I ordered them on the internet, but I order you to give copies of this book to abandoned kids who were, who were there, who were at the detention center here. It made it seem like Harris had ordered hundreds of her books at government expense. In fact, there was one copy of her book at Long Beach, and after Italiano complained, not only was there one copy, but it had been donated by somebody through no prior arrangement, just donated. After Italiano complained, an addendum was later affixed that read, the original version of this article said migrant kids were getting Harris's book in a welcome kit, but it has been updated to note that only one known copy of the book was given to a child. But it was typical of the Post's way of bending the news, writing fiction, creating stories to make one side look bad. Bravo to Italiano, who is incredibly principled, like they're saying, and has worked, as they say, like a dog as a top-notch reporter for the Post for years. Don't tell Donald Trump that she worked like a dog. That's an insult. I'm sure she'll be snapped up in a minute, maybe, by the Times. I have my doubts about that. Or a national outlet. Just a search of her name in the Post library will show thousands of bylines as Italiano trudged all over New York, seeking the truth for a paper that relies on lies. So she was misplaced there, I suppose. This is, I guess, the opinion of Roger Friedman, writing for Showbiz 411. By the way, it is billed as Roger Friedman's Showbiz 411. Hollywood to the Hudson, it says here in their banner. So, I don't know how widespread his readership or influence is, but I'm sure she hopes to be snapped up by the New York Times or some other national outlet. Maybe she's got the experience to do it, but whatever. Interesting that she trudged all over New York seeking the truth for a paper that relies on lies, and the story that undid her didn't have anything to do with New York whatsoever. But, okay. Well, I thought that was an interesting clarification on yesterday's reporting of the story. We can move on, I think, to a couple of the other stories that we have tucked away for discussion today. One I don't think I'll read all the way through because it's extraordinarily long, but people were passing around another Vox explainer, I guess, of Joe Manchin. Extensive interview and piece, a profile piece on Joe Manchin that I think does as little as any of the previous pieces to reveal whether there's any true logic or anything of interest behind what Joe Manchin is doing. I mean, it does more to explain his or detail his background than most profiles I've seen, but none of it makes me say, that's why he does the things he does. I mean, except insofar as, he has always been nonsensical and contrarian, and so he's the same now. But I guess if you're interested in finding out how nonsensical and contrarian he's always been, so that you can predict that he'll continue to be that way, you could use your time on reading this article. I'll pass it around. It might be of some interest to you to read, and I'll try finishing it up and digesting it and seeing if there are any particular points that we would benefit greatly from in bringing forward on the show. All right, let's see. Other things that are in pocket that we can line up. We are now, of course, bumping up against the end of our first full hour here. And there are a number of stories that are sort of like, well, these are all of interest, but they seem like longer reads and perhaps worth digging into, but not something you can do at 8 or at 9:57 on your way out the door. So lots of longer reads that we can add to our discussion after this break coming up. And I'm just scrolling. I feel like there are things in here that have been skipped over for a long time, but none of them short, I guess, is the real problem. All right. We'll see what else there is to retrieve from the Twitter feed from yesterday as well, and find out if we can drop a few of these things. This was an interesting one. Here, we can fit this one in for sure. It's just a matter of the headline, I guess, before we exit for the break. Whose tweet was it? Crystal Hayes, journalist for USA Today, covering a story out of Chicago. Headline here is Eye-Popping Numbers. Chicago sues an Indiana gun store that happens, just by random chance, I guess, to be tied to 850 firearms recovered from crime scenes. All recovered from crime scenes, all used in crimes. Quite amazing, and I guess they all come from one Indiana gun store. We, of course, have been under no illusions about how it is that there are so many guns present in Chicago used for crime. It's a major right-wing talking point. Well, if gun control works, how come there's so much gun crime in Chicago? Well, one answer, Indiana. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio, as usual. Shall we read a little bit from USA Today? It was not actually Crystal Hayes' story here. She's retweeting the story from Grace Hawk, H-A-U-C-K, Hawk. Eye-popping numbers. Chicago sues Indiana gun store tied to 850 firearms recovered from crime scenes. And let's see, it's probably from Gary, Indiana. I think that's long been suspected to be the major source of illegal guns entering into Chicago area. And there it is, yeah. The city of Chicago filed a lawsuit Monday against a northern Indiana gun store. One gun store that it claims is one of the main sources of illicit firearms for the city's criminal market. And if you're interested in blaming them personally or individually, it's West Fourth Sports Incorporated in Gary, Indiana, has engaged in a pattern, they say, of illegal sales that has resulted in the flow of hundreds, if not thousands, of illegal firearms into the city of Chicago. According to the lawsuit filed in the Circuit Court of Cook County, the suit filed with the litigation arm of Everytown for Gun Safety Support Fund and the law firm Meyer Brown LLP seeks long overdue accountability in the form of unspecified damages and an order requiring the store to cease practices contributing to gun trafficking. Good use of the word trafficking there. I've worked tirelessly to reduce violence to keep our streets safe, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot said in a statement on Monday. Time and time again, however, it has become even more clear that holding accountable all those who contribute to gun violence here, regardless of where they are located, is key to our ability to create a safer Chicago. Shootings rose nationwide last year among the coronavirus pandemic and its economic fallout. In Chicago, Black and Latino neighborhoods bore the brunt of both epidemics. No surprise there. There were more than 3,200 shootings with more than 4,000 victims, according to Chicago police data. While the city has previously reported more firearm-related homicides than any other U.S. city, and Republicans love using that, Chicago consistently reports a lower gun homicide rate per capita than other cities like Detroit, New Orleans, and St. Louis. Good point. The lawsuit alleges West Fourth Sports, quote, feeds the market for illegal firearms by knowingly selling its products to an ever-changing roster of gun traffickers and straw purchasers who transport Westforth's guns from Indiana into Chicago, where they are resold to individuals who cannot legally possess firearms, including convicted felons and drug traffickers. Westforth Sports did not immediately respond to a request for comment. According to the complaint, studies of firearms recovered by law enforcement between 2009 and 2016 consistently rank Westforth as the highest out-of-state supplier of crime guns in the city, responsible for more than 850 recovered crime guns over this period. That's pretty convincing. The lawsuit alleges that a review of federal prosecutions from December of 2014 to April 2021 for illegal gun purchases in the Northern District of Indiana revealed approximately 44% of the cases involved sales at Westforth Sports. The documents, according to the lawsuit, show Westforth Sports is known to have sold at least 180 guns to at least 40 people, later charged with federal crimes in connection with the purchases. That's interesting. I got to reread that and digest that slowly. From December 2014 to April 2021. Federal prosecutions for illegal gun purchases, specifically the crime of prosecuting the crime of the illegal gun purchase. 44% of the cases of illegal gun purchases in the Northern District of Indiana involved sales at Westforth Sports. That's pretty remarkable. The documents show Westforth Sports is known to have sold at least 180 guns to at least 100 or to 40 people later charged with federal crimes in connection with the purchases. So not necessarily all the various crimes committed with the guns in northern Indiana, but the specific crime of those sales. On the other hand, in Chicago, they're involved with both the crimes of reselling those guns and possibly other crimes committed with guns where the guns are recovered, and in checking the records, they find out where they came from. One man, 24-year-old Darrell Ivory Jr., purchased 19 handguns from Westforth Sports over the course of 7 months in 2020, according to the lawsuit. Ivory purchased 10 guns in multiple sale transactions and 9 others at intervals designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. All but one was sold to buyers in Chicago, according to the lawsuit. One gun sold to another buyer was recovered by Chicago police just a month after the purchase at Westforth, according to the lawsuit. So it's a pretty quick turnaround from the shelves at Westforth to street crime. In a separate incident, law enforcement recovered 2 guns just a day after Westforth sold them, according to the lawsuit. More than 40% of the Westforth crime guns recovered in Chicago between 2009 and 2016 had a time to crime of less than 3 years, according to the lawsuit. 3 years is quite a span, probably, compared to most of them. These eye-popping numbers are not the result of bad luck or coincidence or location, the complaint says. They are the natural and predictable outcome of a business model that ignores federal laws and regulations that are intended to keep the public safe. The majority of illegally used or possessed firearms recovered in Chicago are traced back to states with less regulation over firearms, such as Indiana and Mississippi. According to a 2017 city report, Indiana is the primary source for approximately 1 out of every 5 crime guns, the report found. Alla Lefkowitz, director of affirmative litigation for Everytown Law, said the lawsuit should be a wake-up call to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. I forgot that they are also the Bureau of Explosives, to take long overdue action against Westforth to protect the public. The ATF has cited Westforth over and over again for violating federal gun regulations, including for selling to straw purchasers. ATF inspectors twice recommended that Westforth's gun dealer license be revoked. Lefkowitz said in a statement, "When this many crime guns are traced back to a single dealer, it raises serious questions about how that dealer does business, and in this case, you don't have to look far for the answer." So we'll see whether anything comes of it, but I guess it's really kind of amazing that the ATF could be investigating and make the recommendation twice that the license be revoked, but, nobody does anything about it. I'd be curious about what the situation is and what sort of excuses are made for them as to why they don't just yank that license. I'd be curious about it. By the way, now have tracked down the provenance of that Showbiz 411 article that I read to you. It's Judy Vincent sent that one to us. Thanks very much, Judy, for doing so. I was wondering about how did that end up in there. I just figured it was attached to somebody's tweet, and I guess it was because you sent it to us via Twitter, so thanks a lot. That reminds me, by the way, when I was on the subject, one, of thanking people who are sending contributions of stories and making mention of Patreon not all that long ago, that was a missed opportunity to catch up with some of our most recent donors to the show, and I wanted to thank everybody for it. And I was wondering, let's see, which ones I had mentioned. I gotta, I guess, keep a full ledger of these things so that I can be sure and check everybody's name off. And at one point I wrote everybody's name down when we did this during Thanksgiving. And then since then it's been bits and pieces. But new contributors that I don't think have had their names called yet, going back to earlier in the month, back April 9th, Brian Turner. Welcome, Brian. Thanks very much. We appreciate your contribution. I'll give everybody the dates, too. How long have they been waiting to have their contributions acknowledged? Adam McGinnis, a contributor to the show. That I noticed, and we've seen a couple of articles and comments sent our way via Twitter as well. Thanks, and I'm sorry that you've been waiting since April 14th to have your name called. And codenamed an international person of mystery using a screen name only of an interesting spelling of macabre. I guess, Maukabre, and I don't know whether that's an online persona in general or just something you adopted for Patreon, but whatever it is, if you made it up just for Patreon, how interesting. You piqued our interest. Thank you for joining us as a contributor. Michael Jenkins as well. In relation to Leroy, or does everybody make that joke with you, or nobody make that joke with you? And Sean Flecken, just last night. So I think we're now up to date on the people who have joined us as new contributors. Thanks to Sean, Michael, Adam, Brian, and Macabre for joining us. And in the other category of people that we need to thank, people who have since boosted their contributions. This is something you can do. I don't know if you're aware of that, but if you sign up for, let's say $567,000 a month in contributions, just pick a number out of a hat through Patreon, and then you decide, I found some money, some coins in the couch, I should up it to $568,000. I hope I did that right. Or let's say around $600,000, just to keep the numbers round. $600,000 a month, that seems crazy, but I can do it. You can go back and you can boost your contribution. I'm hesitant to ask for that all the time because I always feel like, well, you're already doing your part. What we really need, of course, is to involve new contributors. But to hell with that, if you're willing, as Mike D. and Stephen Brown have been. Stephen E. Brown, in case you were wondering. So now you're not talking about Stephen D. Brown, are you? No, I'm speaking of Stephen E. Brown, both of whom, Mike D. and Stephen, have upped their contributions of late, and we always appreciate that. Occasionally people find that they need to lower their contributions. I always wonder whether I've said anything to insult them or whether they've just said, I need to save up for something else, like a new hard drive for Greg's computer or something like that. Well, anyway, we won't call that out. That seems unfair, but certainly increases, something to be celebrated. And while we get notice of those who have reduced them, I'm not going to embarrass anybody. You're still supporting the show, and I appreciate it. But anyway, thanks to all those who have joined of late, and I'll try to have some better system at some point worked out in the future for how we can acknowledge all of that. All right, let's see. Stories that I have saved in Pocket that are of longer form that I have decided to share with you. Here's an interesting thing. Are they now just HuffPost? Yes. I always forget what they've changed their name to. HuffPost with an interesting follow-up story. I always love the follow-ups. The fascist face of Charlottesville has joined the military. The good news is he then got kicked out. Who are we talking about? Think back to the iconic photos of the craziest of the crazy at Charlottesville's Unite the Right rally. I think you'll probably hit the nail on the head when you think of who's the face of that rally. Think back to the Tiki Torch March, and in particular of the photo that prominently featured that youngish, weird-looking, not terribly weird-looking, looked like a normal-ish kid in his uniform, essentially. You remember that there were the various white nationalist groups that marched there that come in the uniforms of polo shirts and khakis. This one had a little logo on it that is actually indicative of his membership in one or the other of these ridiculous organizations. But one of the screamers at the Tiki Torch rally, and I think when you see his picture, you'll say, oh, yeah, that's the guy I'm thinking of. Well, that's the guy they're talking about. Christopher Matthias is not the angry screamer guy. He's the reporter for HuffPost writing this story. And he says that he's a rare example, this guy, of the military taking proactive steps to keep an extremist, the man in a viral photo from the deadly 2017 white supremacist rally, out of its ranks. So at least the system worked once, anyway, for this guy. The white nationalist featured in an infamous viral photograph of the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, joined the U.S. military. Not too surprising, but this HuffPost has learned, but was kicked out before he could attend basic training. So it was good and quick. The racist fool we're talking about is Peter Cytanovich, is my best guess at the way he pronounces the surname of Cytanovic. Cytanovich, perhaps. 24 years old, and expelled from the Nevada National Guard in December after officials learned of his extremist ties through a Defense Department background check, authorities confirmed. His relatively swift dismissal from the National Guard appears to be a rare example of military officials taking proactive, decisive steps to keep an extremist out of the armed services. On August 11th, 2017, Cytanovich was photographed holding a flaming tiki torch and screaming as he and other white nationalists marched in Charlottesville. The picture went viral and continues to haunt and shape Cytanovich's life, which, not so bad. I mean, not bad outcome as far as I'm concerned. It's terrible for him, but what can I tell you? You know, actions have consequences. His face of fury quickly became emblematic of the bloody and historic weekend when a resurgent American white nationalist movement went mask off. This was, of course, before the pandemic. But you know. After publishing a series of stories about extremists in the military, HuffPost recently received a tip that Cytanovich described himself as a, quote, U.S. officer candidate at U.S. Army on LinkedIn, which he really wasn't, but we'll see how much truth there was to it. I'm sure he was intended to join the officer training program, but of course it was the Nevada National Guard as opposed to the U.S. Army proper, but okay. Anyway, although his name couldn't be found in a Defense Department database of military service members, a Peter Cytanovich VI, believe it or not, was listed in a directory of recent enlistees published in a 2020 issue of Battleborn, the quarterly magazine of the Nevada National Guard. Maybe a bit ambitious in its naming, but whatever. A spokesman for the Nevada National Guard confirmed that Cytanovich enlisted on November 22nd, 2019, but his stint in the U.S. Armed Forces lasted only a little over a year. I think that's a little too long. And that he was ejected because of his, quote, affiliations. Did it take him that long that he was in there for a year and didn't make it to basic training? Because they just said that they did it. Was it in the subheader? No. But it was right up at the top. kicked out before he could attend basic training. I mean, does it take a year before they actually send you to basic training? Maybe in the Nevada National Guard, you're doing your, 1 weekend a month and whatever, and then 2 weeks in a year, and I guess that's the basic training. Are you running around doing a weekend a month without basic training, though? I don't know. Well, let's see what they can clarify for us in the rest of the article. Initial criminal and fingerprint checks found no record that would deny enlistment. Lieutenant Colonel Mickey Kirschenbaum, he must have taken special pride in this, Mickey Kirschenbaum told HuffPost in a statement explaining how Saitanovich initially joined the U.S. military, which has regulations forbidding participation in extremist groups. They're just not working all that well. Because he had a 4-year college degree, Saitanovich entered the Nevada National Guard as a Specialist E4, the highest rank available to junior enlisted recruits. He started to attend monthly drills to prepare for Army basic combat training. All right, I guess that is the way it works. However, during routine in-processing, Mr. Saitanovich was not able to obtain a security clearance, Kirschenbaum said. A Defense Department background check revealed that the FBI had opened an investigation into Saitanovich following his participation in the Charlottesville rally. Lieutenant Emerson Marcus, another spokesperson for the Nevada National Guard, told HuffPost. That's how the National Guard learned of Saitanovich's affiliations, Marcus said. The FBI declined to comment on its investigation into Saitanovich, who was never charged with a crime in relation to the events in Charlottesville. It's important to note, I guess. Pentagon spokesperson Candace Tresh said in an email that the Defense Department could not discuss specific cases, but noted that the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency searches federal, state, local, and vendor records as part of the background investigation process and also obtains information from the applicant, prior and current employers, co-workers, neighbors, and references. The Nevada National Guard canceled Saitanovich's orders for basic training on July 27, 2020, months before he was set to ship out. Months later, on December 17th, he received a formal entry-level separation from the U.S. military. Saitanovich, and is that will they attach honorable or dishonorable to that? Is that the sort of discharge for which they would make such a determination, or no? I don't know. What do you think, Darwin? You could probably tell us. Where were we on this? Saitanovich, who, before enlisting, gave interviews in which he expressed regret for attending the Charlottesville rally, good, and claimed, not all that convincingly, with a link here, I'm curious to see what that might say, to renounce white nationalism. And he declined, though, to comment on this story through a family member. The Nevada National Guard does not tolerate racist extremist ideology, Kirschenbaum said in his statement. The Nevada National Guard took action immediately after discovering Mr. Saitanovich's affiliations. But that's not always the case. That wasn't part of his quote. That's the HuffPost's findings. After HuffPost published a series of stories in 2019 helping expose 11 U.S. servicemen as members of the white nationalist group Identity Europa, for which they used a little V-shaped U, right? Evropa, but Europa is what it is. Only 6 were kicked out of the military. The other 5 are still in the armed forces, underscoring both the vagaries of military codes prohibiting extremism and how enforcement of those codes is often left to the whims and discretion of individual commanders. Moreover, there's evidence that even well-known white nationalists like Saitanovich can manage to join the military undetected. Last month, HuffPost found that Sean Mccaffrey, a prominent white nationalist podcaster and former member of Identity Europa, recently graduated from Air Force boot camp. Mccaffrey was also on the FBI's radar, HuffPost learned, but the agency declined to say whether it ever alerted the Air Force about his extremism. Scholars of extremism have long warned about the dangers of far-right extremists joining the military, where they receive training they can then use to inflict violence on civilians. After an angry far-right crowd stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 15% of those arrested for their role in the insurrection had some sort of military affiliation. In February, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin issued a military-wide stand-down order requiring commanders to have needed discussions about extremism with troops. Earlier this month, Austin wrote a memo outlining the Pentagon's plans to improve the screening of military recruits for extremist beliefs. Now, anti-racist activists have long touted the importance of creating a social cost for embracing hate and white nationalism. Sitanovic's abrupt dismissal from the National Guard is only the latest censure he's faced for his appearance in Charlottesville, though at other times his infamy has provoked soft-focused media coverage and special attention from school administrators. There were hundreds of marchers in Charlottesville, but thanks to a shutter snap, Sitanovich became the face of hate. On the night of August 11, 2017, as hundreds of white supremacists marched across the campus of the University of Virginia, photographer Samuel Coram focused his lens on Sitanovich, then a 20-year-old college student sporting a fashy haircut and a white polo shirt emblazoned with the Identity Europa logo. There we go. Now we have an answer on that. Sitanovich, which, by the way, you would have to order, and I imagine they order in bulk from someone somewhere, and I'm curious as to who the vendor is and whether or not they would continue in such a relationship if they knew what that stupid logo was. They might, but they might not. That will be left for researchers other than me. I have to deal with enough at this point, but a good point, good question to ask. Sitanovich held a tiki torch in his right hand, his mouth agape as he chanted, "You will not replace us," which of course morphed eventually into "Jews will not replace us," but there you go. Anyway, that chanted in angry unison with the ghoulish group. I love the editorializing. The next day, as they rallied again near a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee in a Charlottesville park, violently clashing with anti-fascist activists before a neo-Nazi drove his car into the crowd of counter-protesters, killing one person, Heather Heyer, right, and injuring many more. The photo of Sitanovich started to go viral on Twitter. Online sleuths quickly identified him. By the time Sitanovich stepped off the plane the next day at Reno Tahoe International Airport, a news crew was there to greet him. The day after, his photo was printed above the fold on the front page of the Reno Journal-Gazette. I did not expect the photo to be shared as much as it was. I understand the photo has a very negative connotation, Sitanovich said in one of the many interviews he gave at the time, but I hope that the people sharing the photo are willing to listen, that I'm not the angry racist they see in that photo. Okay. But he still calls himself a white nationalist, while claiming to condemn the carnage in Charlottesville. I will defend tooth and nail my views as a white nationalist, he said. I love my culture and will fight for it, but never in a violent way. I'll fight tooth and nail, but not violent. It's just everything's a metaphor. Tooth and nail. I'm speaking of going to the dentist and getting a manicure. Sitanovich said he and his family started to receive death threats. That's unfortunate, but it will happen. And as the world grappled with the significance of Charlottesville, and with a white nationalist movement emboldened by the rise of former President Donald Trump, the photo continued to travel far and wide, accompanying hundreds of articles written in multiple languages. And you can see why. You're familiar with the photo. By the way, what do you think it takes for a student at what university of... is it one of the University of Nevada? Did it say where he was a student? It just said he was a college student. Anyway, a college student, 20-year-old. I'm just sort of curious as to what motivates and what logistics go into saying, I'm going to fly to Charlottesville, Virginia for the weekend for a white nationalist rally. I don't know whether that's the extent of his tooth and nail thing or not, but there you have it. Just a question. Anyway, by late December in the UK, The Guardian named it one of the best photographs of 2017. So kudos to the photographer who put that thing together. In February of 2018, the photo appeared on flyers across the campus of the University of Nevada at Reno, where Sitanovich was, there we go, studying political science and history. UNR protests racists, the flyer declared, and then with the hashtag of UNR Black History Month. Students had held protests and started petitions demanding he be expelled, but school administrators declined to do so, citing the First Amendment. Cvitanovich did, however, resign his campus job driving students to and from class. We'll be right back. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Shall we continue with the HuffPost report on whatever happened to this dude Cvitanovich, Peter Cvitanovich, after his being photographed at the Charlottesville rally. We left off after we learned that he was a student at University of Nevada at Reno, and that he ended up having to resign his campus job, but wasn't kicked out of school over his appearance in the infamous photograph. And let's see, a couple of months later, Cvitanovich sat down for a sympathetic softball interview on The Full Measure with Sharyl Attkisson, a show broadcast nationally by the right-wing Sinclair Broadcast Group. The episode was part of a series about snowflake syndrome. Oh, remember when that was the big worry? It wasn't Potato Head or Dr. Seuss. It was left-wing snowflakes. Now it's woke snowflakes, I guess. The idea being, of course, that liberals are too intolerant of ideas with which they disagree. Cvitanovich recounted how his fellow students had tried to expel him over his participation in the Charlottesville rally, even though he'd allegedly had a political change of heart. Interesting that he would have to claim that as a defense, because otherwise, I guess he would agree with being kicked. I mean, he wouldn't, but that's an interesting dodge to take, right? I mean, just thinking about it logically, all of these people are snowflakes. They want to get me kicked out because I have these certain political views, which I don't have. I've changed my political views. Therefore, their attempt to kick me out is wrong. Well, if you had not disavowed them, would they have been right? Because before you announced that you disavowed them, and while no one would have had any knowledge of your alleged disavowal, then they were right at the time? No, they were wrong then. I just changed my political views because I thought it would be a nice thing to do. But I also shouldn't have been expelled if I had been and stayed an explicit Nazi. I mean, it's a position. I just don't know if that's the one he's taking. Anyway, Cvitanovich recounted how his fellow students had tried to expel him, even though he'd allegedly had a political change of heart. I don't know what he did about telling them that. My biggest mistake is that I stupidly said I am a white nationalist. Well, that is a big mistake. And at that time, I did believe I was. Now, this is interesting. Did you change your views or did you just change your label? I guess that's why it wasn't very convincing to the author, right? And at that time, I did believe I was still a white nationalist. But after looking back at the movement, looking back at what happened, I realized that calling myself a white nationalist, I don't think he stressed it that way, but I will. But calling myself a white nationalist was very wrong, and I no longer agree. I no longer see myself as such. That is unconvincing, isn't it? Attkisson, the reporter, didn't press him further on the subject. I guess the podcast is embedded here in case you have any interest in listening to their full measure report on snowflake syndrome. I'm a little bit interested in, it'll contribute to their numbers if I click play, but I'm curious about I'm curious about how long is the podcast. All right, I'm just sort of wondering, like, the future of Kagro in the Morning. Do we ever consider A, going to a video format, and B, changing the length of the program. I wonder sometimes whether we have difficulty getting people to, or expanding interest in the show. Like when we say it's 2 hours every day. I mean, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You can listen to 5 minutes. You don't even have to listen at all. Just send money. There's always that option. But I wonder whether 2 hours, I think it's still pretty unusual because we treat it more like a radio show than anything else. But this podcast, for instance, is video, 7 minutes and 38 seconds. So really, you know, the original definition of podcast kind of stuff, as people really understood it, it's just a special purpose presentation of the interview. However long the interview takes, that's all we'll present, and that'll be sent out as a podcast. We don't actually have to bother putting together a full show. If we just want to talk to that Nazi guy and put it out, that's all they do. Just curious. Anyway, Saitanovich had trouble presenting his senior thesis without friction. Angry students confronted him in the hallway immediately afterward. Oh, they at least waited until afterwards and didn't rattle him going in. That was very polite of them. Maybe they were just sleeping late because they were all high on drugs. Communists, you know. Anyway, angry students confronted him in the hallway afterwards. "Run, Nazi, run," they chanted, according to the Nevada Sagebrush, the student newspaper. Saitanovich graduated from UNR and, perhaps wanting to escape his infamy, enrolled in a political theory master's program thousands of miles away at the London School of Economics. But the photo followed him across the Atlantic, too. "White nationalist from infamous Charlottesville protest now reportedly studying at LSE," read the headline from The Independent, a leading British newspaper, which printed the photo. Once again, Saitanovich's fellow students were protesting his presence on campus and calling for his expulsion. And once again, the school's administration allowed him to remain enrolled. "LSE protests racists," read flyers posted across campus. Now, what happens? Does he graduate from there too? I find it interesting that you would, that's quite a progression. Graduate from University of Nevada at Reno, head to the London School of Economics for a postgraduate degree of some sort. In what? I don't know. Do they do other than economics? And then, I don't know whether he finishes or not. At that point, enlist in the Nevada National Guard. Seems like not the trajectory I think he had in mind for himself. But maybe part of it was because he had no other choice, because people made his life a living hell, because he went to a rally where he declared his intention to make everyone else's life a living hell. Fair game, I guess. In June of 2019, Saitanovich granted an interview request from, I'm just telling you what it says. This is the name they chose for themselves. I would say that, I don't know whether things are different in the UK or whatever, but the student newspaper at the London School of Economics. Don't know why they chose this. I guess it's their mascot. But as a result, this article now reads that in June of 2019, Saitanovich granted an interview request from the Beaver, which, whether that takes you to, Leave It to Beaver or somewhere else, I don't know. But that's where things stand at the London School of Economics, I guess. It is the LSE student newspaper. Is Beaver, like the busy Beaver, like very industrious? Is that why he's the mascot of the London School of Economics? Not really sure. Is it because, I don't know, is it a joke about the stereotype of the horrible shape of, horrible state of dental care in the UK? I don't think so, but we shouldn't be perpetuating that stereotype anyway. What the hell? Why not? I don't know. What else are you going to say about the fact that they call their school newspaper the Beaver, and that we now say an interview request from the Beaver? It's going great. Wally arranged the whole interview, right? He described being harassed by some students at the school, but said administrators had been accommodating, offering him security and a list of professors he could call if he ever felt threatened. Interesting. Although acknowledging that white privilege exists, that's nice, and even calling himself a feminist, and really, why not? Just throw that in there as well. Saitanovich still defended his motivation for going to Charlottesville to protest against the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue, which anti-racist activists wanted torn down. Because as a Nevadan, it was extremely important to him, I'm sure, blah, blah, blah. I mean, let's hear the excuse. The reason I went to Charlottesville was the Confederate statues, this love of culture being destroyed, he said, echoing a white nationalist talking point. I wasn't wrong on everything, Sitanovich added, defending the reasons he went to the rally. I was wrong in the way I expressed it. I was never a neo-Nazi, and I didn't understand what being a white nationalist was when I said I was one. His interviews from that time suggest otherwise. And of course, he was a college student and studying history and political science. And gee whiz, I don't know what a white nationalist is. And it's just weird that I got my hair cut to look like Hitler. Whatever, I didn't understand it. The London School of Economics did not return HuffPost's request for comment as to whether Sitanovich completed his master's degree program. 6 months after his interview with the student newspaper, he was back in Reno enlisting in the Nevada National Guard. Later, a Defense Department background check would reveal that he was the guy in that Charlottesville photo, and he would be kicked out of the U.S. military. So you must think that there's nowhere to turn, and maybe there shouldn't be anywhere to turn. I find that very interesting, and I'm gathering that he didn't finish his program at the London School of Economics either, and just must be feeling like he's being hounded to the ends of the earth, which is kind of what's happening. And ironically, probably in all likelihood because he left before finishing his degree program and certainly was kicked out of the National Guard, someone replaced him. I don't know whether any of them were listening to him chanting that you will not replace us, or in particular him, but someone did. So, final irony, I guess, on that. There are a lot of very interesting, looks like linked articles coming out of this piece, so maybe you'll do some further reading in HuffPost and find some more interesting stuff. Let's see. Follow-up story to what we discussed yesterday. You know, sometimes the way these things go down, right after our discussion of the need to, or the increasing calls for releasing at least the AstraZeneca vaccine stockpile that we have in this country and sending them, if not overseas, then sending them abroad, say to Mexico and Canada, but possibly overseas, perhaps to India. Word did come down that there were some official actions being taken by the Biden administration. They were essentially reversing their earlier word, if not formal stance, that these things couldn't happen. But I think we made mention of that yesterday, and that we were awaiting reporting that might reveal how they got around the contract clauses. Let's see if it's in here. The New York Times reporting on the situation. As virus rages abroad, Biden promises to ship millions of vaccine doses. President Biden will send up to 60 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine to countries pleading for help, but some see a medicine dropper. A medicine dropper, that is just to say a drop in the ocean here, for a 4-alarm fire. Well, that may be true. Is there more we can do, I guess, is the question behind that. Cheryl Gay Stolberg, writing for the New York Times on this one. President Biden, under intense pressure to do more to address the surging pandemic abroad, including a humanitarian crisis in India, intends to make up to 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine available to other countries, so long as federal regulators deem the doses safe, officials said Monday. And I know that might cause a delay, but you really have to do that. Out of respect to the people you're handing these doses out to, you can't give them things that the United States authorities say are unsafe. That ain't right. So the announcement came after Mr. Biden spoke with Prime Minister, how we pronounce his first name, Modi, Narendra Modi of India, and the two pledged to, quote, oh boy, good language here, work closely together in the fight against COVID-19. Thank God we got a quote on that one. It is a significant, albeit limited, shift for the White House, which has until now been reluctant to make excess doses of coronavirus vaccine available in large amounts. Global health groups said the commitment was not nearly big enough, and it comes with a catch. The AstraZeneca doses were made at a Baltimore plant owned by Emergent Biosolutions, where production has been halted amid fears of contamination. So I guess at least two things we need certified as safe here. One, does it have a blood clot problem? And two, is it contaminated, given that it was made at the same Baltimore plant that has had so much trouble? Wouldn't that be a disaster? As part of a continuing safety review of the plant, the Food and Drug Administration will have to certify that the doses meet the United States' standards for safety and quality. Mr. Biden took office vowing to restore the United States as a leader in global public health, and he's taken certain steps to do so, rejoining the World Health Organization, pledging $4 billion to an international vaccine effort, and providing financial support to help Biological E, a vaccine manufacturer in India, to produce at least 1 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines by the end of 2022. But on the matter of sending vaccines abroad that were manufactured for the United States and funded by American taxpayers, the president has been consistent. He will help other countries, he has said, but only after every American has had a chance to get a coronavirus shot. He made a limited exception for Mexico and Canada last month. Now, with some states on the verge of reporting that their vaccine supplies exceed demand, the American vaccination campaign is at an inflection point, and the president appears more willing to consider sending surplus doses overseas. That may be especially true of the vaccine made by AstraZeneca, which is still not authorized for use in the United States. More than a year into the pandemic, as infections are beginning to ebb domestically, the coronavirus continues to sweep across the globe. Devastation is hardly limited to India. Brazil, which has one of the world's highest death tolls from COVID-19, now faces a hunger epidemic. In Turkey, which ranks fourth in the world in new cases daily per person, President Recep Erdogan, and I'm skipping the middle name again, but it's Tayyip, I guess so. Erdogan has ordered a 3-week national lockdown, closing non-essential businesses and sending all students home. Given the scope of the crisis, liberals on Capitol Hill and global health advocacy organizations say the president has a moral obligation to do more. Mr. Modi pressed the president in their call on Monday to ease patent and intellectual property controls on pharmaceuticals, a cause liberals have championed as they accuse Mr. Biden of kowtowing to pharmaceutical companies and their profits. 60 million doses, that's showing up to a 4-alarm fire with an eyedropper full of water, said Asia Russell, the executive director of Health Gap, a global AIDS treatment advocacy organization. Citing an interview Mr. Biden gave to the health activist Adi Barkan, she says he had promised in his campaign that intellectual property rights would not stand in the way of access to a successful COVID-19 vaccine, whatever that may mean. Senior Biden administration officials asked by a reporter on Monday whether they had a moral obligation to ease the patent restrictions, said they had no new information to share, but Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, defended the president's response, saying he's been one of the largest providers of assistance to address the COVID pandemic around the world, including to India, and we have obviously taken some significant steps over the last couple of days to address their immediate needs. The situation in India is especially dire. The country is experiencing what may be the worst crisis any nation has seen since the pandemic began. Hospitals are overflowing, and desperate patients are dying as they wait to see doctors. On Monday, India broke the world record for daily coronavirus infections for a 5th consecutive day, reporting nearly 353,000 new cases, and it added 2,812 deaths to its overall total of more than 195,000, which experts say is likely to be a vast undercount. The crisis in India is a humanitarian disaster unfolding before our eyes, said Tom Hart, acting chief executive, of the One campaign, a nonprofit dedicated to eradicating world poverty. Based on an analysis of contracts signed by Mr. Biden's most recent predecessor, that is an interesting way of putting it, the group estimates that the federal government has secured 550 million more doses than it needs to cover every American. With worrisome variants spreading in the United States and around the world, public health experts say vaccinating people overseas is not only a moral imperative, but it's essential to protecting Americans. J. Stephen Morrison, the director of the Global Health Policy Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said Biden needed to offer a more sweeping vision of how the United States can help the world. We are approaching these colossal, complex problems in an ad hoc, reactive, short-term manner, Morrison said. He called the announcement on Monday a further incremental step by the Biden administration toward fuller engagement internationally to address the dire vaccine gap. On a conference call with reporters on Monday, senior Biden administration officials said that in addition to the money pledged to the International Vaccine Initiative, known as COVAX, the administration intended to spend $11.5 billion appropriated by Congress as part of the, well, they say stimulus package, but we say rescue package, on helping other countries to help other countries, I guess, fight the pandemic and administer vaccines. But the officials would not address questions about patent waivers on vaccines developed by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna using sophisticated biotech methods. The Moderna vaccine was developed in partnership with the federal government. The announcement on Monday about the AstraZeneca vaccine came only a day after the administration unveiled a series of steps to help India, including easing the way for the export of raw materials to make vaccine and supplying that country with therapeutics, rapid diagnostic test kits, ventilators, and personal protective gear. Tim Manning, the White House COVID-19 supply coordinator, explained the plan on Monday on Twitter, right? And Greg sent us that and we read it out. But whether or when the AstraZeneca doses will reach India is unclear. Administration officials would not commit to giving them to any particular country. Ms. Psaki, is there any P in that at all? I don't know. Said that about 10 million doses could be released in the coming weeks. You know what that means. The previous administration would have said very soon, 2 weeks, or a very short period of time. But in the coming weeks, if the FDA approved the vaccines made at the Baltimore plant, and that another 50 million doses were in various stages of production. Right now, we have 0 doses available of AstraZeneca, she said. I guess they're made, but they're not approved. The New York Times has reported extensively on problems at the plant, which had to throw out millions of doses of AstraZeneca vaccine from October to January. And it later discarded up to 15 million doses of the vaccine developed by Johnson & Johnson, also because of concerns about possible contamination. AstraZeneca's vaccine, unlike those of Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, it's Janssen, damn it. Anyway, I should just make that a sound effect. Has not been granted emergency use authorization by the FDA. In announcing that they would release it, Biden administration officials were effectively conceding that they would not need the vaccine here in the United States. I think they're willing to concede that. Last month, Biden released a total of 4 million doses of the vaccine, AstraZeneca, to Canada and Mexico, a move that generated controversy last week when the company disclosed that the doses had been made at the Emergent plant. The president said last week that he was considering sending more overseas. We're looking at what is going to be done with some of the vaccines that we are not using, he said. We've got to make sure that they are safe to be sent. That's true. Sorry about not checking that earlier, Canada, but hope all is going well for you. I didn't realize that was the case. But that will absolutely be essential. As much as we'd like to get them out the door quickly, you can't take shortcuts just because you're sending them overseas. It's even worse in many ways if you're just sending them overseas. All right, let's see. There's another story that I thought it might be interesting to share with you that's not got a major impact on, the way we live our lives, but you might find interesting all by itself. Just sort of one of those interesting exposés that you'll say, I knew it about those people, but you'll enjoy hearing about it anyway. And what better way to end the show, in fact? Hard news would probably be better, but this will do as well. The New Yorker has this interesting profile / backgrounder on the odious Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association. A terrible person and somebody you were inclined, I'm sure, to hold in minimal high regard, as we sometimes say. But this will make it worse. Secret footage, it says here. The secret footage of the NRA chief's botched elephant hunt What a guy. He's shooting tyrannical elephants in Africa. Wayne LaPierre has cultivated his image as an exemplar of American gun culture, but video of his clumsy marksmanship and details regarding his Rodeo Drive shopping trips tell another story. This, according to Mike Spees, we're going to guess is the pronunciation, because I think we've called his name before, and I reminded you that I knew someone with the same last name, and they said Spees, but it's spelled like spies, as in spies like us. But Mike, give me a call on Skype one day, and we'll discuss how to pronounce your name. Here's the story. After the mass shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, December 14th, you all know, Wayne LaPierre, the head of the National Rifle Association, told Americans agitating for new gun regulations, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Less than a year later, LaPierre and his wife Susan traveled to Botswana's Okavango Delta, where they hoped to show NRA members that they had the grit, whatever that might be, to take on a different adversary, African bush elephants, the largest land mammals on Earth. Those tyrannical mammals that are taking away our rights and invading the United States. They flew overseas to go kill an elephant that wasn't bothering them in the least. Anyway, the trip was filmed by a crew from Under Wild Skies, an NRA-sponsored television series that was meant to boost the organization's profile among hunters, a key element of its donor base. But I bet they also paid for him to take this trip of a lifetime as well. They're just producing television shows in which he stars. No big deal. That's why they're bankrupt. But the program never aired, so it was a huge waste of money, according to sources and records, because of concerns that it could turn into a public relations fiasco. So guess what? Let's turn it into one, shall we? The Trace and the New Yorker obtained a copy of the footage, which has been hidden from public view for 8 years. It shows that when guides tracked down an elephant for LaPierre, because he didn't do it himself, it was a golf cart hunt, the NRA chief proved to be a poor marksman. After LaPierre's first shot wounded the elephant, so he's torturing it, guides brought him a short distance from the animal, which was lying on its side, immobilized. Firing from point-blank range, LaPierre shot the animal 3 times in the wrong place. Finally, a guide had the host of Under Wild Skies fire the shot that killed the elephant. Later that day, Susan LaPierre showed herself to be a better shot than her husband after guides tracked down an elephant for her, because they were very hungry. They both had to eat the entire elephant. Really, couples go and get a his and her elephant. Susan killed it, cut off its tail, and held it in the air. "Victory!" she shouted, laughing. "That's my elephant tail. Way cool." That's so awesome. Victory. I was driven to an elephant that was driven out of the bush to be shot. For 3 decades, LaPierre has held the NRA's fundraising efforts led the efforts by railing against the out-of-touch elites and selling himself as an authentic champion of American self-reliance and the unfettered right to protect oneself with a gun from elephants on another continent. But the footage, as well as newly uncovered legal records, suggest that behind his carefully constructed everyman image, and he really did a terrible job constructing it, LaPierre is a coddled executive who is clumsy with a firearm and fearful of the violent political climate he helped to create. The NRA, as you might imagine, did not respond to requests for comment in putting this rather lengthy piece together. It's quite interesting, and I saw lots of people commenting on various snippets that they gleaned from the profile, which make me think that you might find it interesting. Perhaps if you want to read the piece off the air and pick out the best parts and let us know about it, or we may return to it perhaps at some point later in the week. It may be some time before Greg is able to return to us. I don't know what the state of the computer equipment is there. We hope to hear from him tomorrow. But hey, if not, we may find ourselves with plenty of time to fill by bashing Wayne LaPierre by reading through this New Yorker piece. But if not, you want to study up first, you'll find it in our write-up. We have both of our assistants out today. Not only the producers here out at the dentist, but Greg's computer disabled and Scott Anderson out for the day as well. so I'll be writing up the summary myself. Let me tell you what's coming up on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next, just so I can handle all the jobs here today. But he'll actually tell you the stories. Here's what he's got on tap. The DHS reviews domestic terrorists and white nationalists in its ranks, and the former Department Chief of Staff under Trump reminded that everything Trump did at DHS was politicized. So they're not just in the Army, now they're in the Department of Homeland Security as well. What else has he got? Well, we can squeeze in one or two more of these fun stories after this short announcement.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Marine scientists are reporting that the extent of DDT barrels dumped in the Pacific Ocean off Catalina Island is staggering. And Republicans, believe it or not, obstructing a bill that restores the FTC's power to seize ill-gotten gains by fraudulent companies. Feels like something we'd need to do. See you tomorrow.